Well, I'd like to welcome you all to this Concert Conversations for the November Masterworks concert for the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, and a special treat today. We're always very fortunate to be joined by our music director, Mark Russell Smith, but through the magic of Zoom, today we also get to be joined by Concertmaster for the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, Naha Greenholtz. To both of you, a very warm welcome from the Quad Cities.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Happy to be here.
Great to have you. Well, this is going to be a wonderful concert. We're going to hear some extraordinary music, and we'll mix up the schedule just a little bit because I think we'll begin the concert actually with the Bartok. Our conversation, though, I think it would be great to begin with Beethoven, because that's where we're going to hear some wonderful music from Naha Greenholtz and all of her colleagues with the Quad City Symphony Orchestra. So, Maestro, if you could, please tell me a little bit about the selection of the Beethoven for this second concert and why that was important.
Well, as we all know, you probably heard a thousand times, you know, the 250th birthday, where the musical world is celebrating the 250th birthday of Beethoven. And we had planned actually originally in December on the birthday, on the Masterworks date that was closest to his birthday. The original plan was to do Mahler's First Symphony, a gigantic work, and then open with Naha playing the Beethoven Violin Concerto. So originally we had, you know, examples of Beethoven's work, a huge symphony, the Ninth Symphony, a concerto, and a piano concerto. And so now with the COVID version, or, you know, with the socially distanced version of Beethoven, we have an opportunity to have a couple symphonies and still, you know, have a concerto, which is, you know, both the piano concerto and the violin concerto, the triple concerto. I mean, it's part and parcel to who Beethoven is and to how he expresses himself. And because, you know, the two symphonies we have are the first and the third symphony, with kind of middle Beethoven, which is kind of his like most verdant creative period, kind of the most quintessential creative period. I think the violin concerto really sums up that language and that, you know, breadth and all the kind of stuff that we think about with Beethoven. And it's like one of the greatest violin concertos ever.
Speaking of, Naha, would you mind starting by telling us a little bit about your relationship with this work?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, you know, everything Mark said and like what it represents in Beethoven's evolution, and I'll say also this work is very symphonic, and it was written in the same year as his Fourth Symphony, and at that time he was already sketching his Fifth Symphony, and so it's kind of born out of that language. And the violin is very much like a decoration, or, you know, very very much like accompanies the orchestra in a lot of ways. And personally, this concerto has been with me for a long time. I started studying it in college, and I worked really hard on the first movement, and I think it was I wasn't quite ready for it. It's you'll hear a lot of violins say it's a work that requires a lot of emotional and musical maturity, and I think that's very true. And so, having worked on it and looking back, and I was actually just in the basement trying to, you know, find my fingerings and some notes that Donald Weilerstein had you know, presented to me, you know, as we were kind of struggling a little bit through the concerto, and then kind of tying it together. I've actually played the third movement a lot. I was a soloist with a ballet company, the National Ballet of Canada in Toronto. I was playing Concertmaster as well, and the third movement was featured for large scale like ballet work, and so I got to perform it like 12 times in the pit. And playing a concerto in the pit is a very different experience. You don't get as much, say, artistically, in terms of like what the weight and the tempos and the flow is going to be. a lot of that is decided by the choreographers and kind of depends on what recording direction they've decided to go with. And so it's I'm very, very happy to be able to tie it all together now, you know, stitch the whole thing together. And
But actually probably nice to, like, when you play something over and over again, I mean, to just like to not have to think about it, to be free enough, you know. I
oh,
mean, if you play it
absolutely.
12 times, I mean, that's like, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse in a way, you know, because like
Yeah.
you said, you have to do it like the choreographer wants it. But on the other hand, you played it 12 times now, so it's just
Right,
like,
right. By the
so
11th time, you're just, you know, you're just going to work. So.
Well, that actually does touch on my next question. As many of us know, you have an amazing career that takes you all over the place, and you get to perform with outstanding ensembles. Just as an artist, what is it when you get to come back and get the, shall we say, the home court advantage and play with people that you have an established and I think a wonderfully arced relationship over time? How is that qualitatively different for you?
Absolutely. It feels like coming home. I love working with Mark, and I have so much fondness and respect for all the members of the Quad City Symphony. And I'd say I've been here almost nine years now. I don't know. It's been almost a decade, I think. And you know, we just keep on getting better, and the sound of the strings, especially, has really evolved over the time I've been here. And you know, it's just a pleasure to keep coming back, and we keep strengthening the communications and the bonds, and now also we have a musical history, and that is a really nice thing.
Oh, if I could, though, you said something earlier that really stuck in my mind, that you could acknowledge at the first attempt at this that you had some ways to grow. But I would, which I think that's a wonderful introspective sign of, you know, the awareness of one's artistry. But I have to imagine, doesn't that stick with you? I mean, when we read a great book, even in full adulthood, then come back in 10 years and read it, it's like, why didn't I see that before?
Yes.
Is it the same way that when you come back to a work as important and vital as this, that you're like, you know what I did before was good, but this is even better?
I think with this concerto in particular, I mean, it's kind of encapsulated in the first bar, in that you have, you know, the hits of the timpani that represent fate, and that comes back in all these different voices throughout the first movement. Really comes back in the trumpets later, which has, you know, heavy musical symbolism. And I think with youth, it's really hard to grapple with that and really understand. And I think another thing that makes this piece unique is that because of those themes, and because of the role of the violin throughout the piece, and especially in the first and second movements, that musical simplicity is a key aspect. And I think when you're still working on your own mastery of your own instrument, it's hard to know yourself enough and to trust in your own technique that you can really let the composer shine through, and trust that making simple musical lines is going to carry. And so I think that's a discovery that, you know, takes a lot of practice and performance, and self-discovery to be able to bring that to an audience.
Well, perceived simplicity. I mean, like, you know, like we always talk about, I mean, the hardest thing to do is to be simple in a way, you know what I mean? I mean, just technically speaking. And I mean, this is, for me, this is the huge challenge for the violin in this piece. I mean, it's all this incredibly florid obligato that's on top of stuff that has to sound, that is like technically super hard to achieve. I mean, it's way up in the stratosphere. It, you know, it has to sound seamless. The bow changes. I mean, there's so many technical things that are so challenging, but the aesthetic has to be just this beautiful spinning simple melody, like you said. And so, like, to create simplicity actually takes like unbelievable virtuosity. You know, when we hear auditions for the Quad City Symphony, one of the components is always a solo. And so like if somebody, and we're, you know, of course the players are behind a screen, so we don't know who they are, what they're going to play. And so when somebody starts with Beethoven, we always like, oh, you know, because it's like hard, you know, it's hard. And like, you have to be really brave and really confident to pull it off because of what exactly like I just said, you know, because it has to be perfectly in tune. It just has to be perfect and simple, which is like so easy to say, but so hard to achieve, you know?
Right. And then when there's more like flashiness, in your face kind of virtuosity, sometimes it's easier to hide. It's more distractions.
That is just fascinating. So, Maestro, I'm going to start with you on this, but Naha, we want to hear from you as well. You said something interesting about letting the composer sort of shine through. Let's, if we could, talk a little bit about the psyche of Beethoven, because I think that's always a part of everything that he did. And as opposed to what we heard last month with the first symphony, here we've got something in between the first symphony and the violin concerto, and that is the Heiligenstadt Testament. So Beethoven was coming to grips with the onset of deafness and what that was going to mean for him, and he gets depressed for a while. But then out comes this very hopeful reflection, or basically, well, like he says, a testament that after all, life is worth living. So it's very optimistic and upbeat. Where does that figure in your approach to a piece? I mean, your read on the composer's.
Well, I mean, I mean, you know, the musicologists kind of, you know, very conveniently say, well, there's the early, there's the middle, and there's the late. And it is true that, I mean, of course, I mean, undeniably, there were those three periods. You know, and the late period is when he was you know, almost completely deaf and was the most inwardly focused. And so you get the Ninth Symphony, you get Missa Solemnis, you get the late string quartets, you get all this kind of music of the future. Like this middle period, which, like Naha said, the Fourth Symphony, the Fifth Symphony, the, you know, some of the middle chamber music, Opus 59 string quartets. I mean, he's just like he's hit it, he's found his stride, he's found his artistic stride. And so like he's just composing like crazy and composing like monumental works like crazy, but that doesn't mean they're all the same. I mean, this work was written for Franz Clement, and it's very specific to him. He's like a total famous virtuoso and the concertmaster of the Theater am Wien Orchestra. I mean, like, you know, certainly more famous than Beethoven was early on, you know, but his violin technique is the kind of elegant, is the kind of singing, is the kind of dolce expression, as opposed to the kind of like show-offy virtuosity of Viotti or somebody like that. And so there were kind of two approaches, and Clement was definitely on the like lyrical, like gorgeous, beautiful musical side. And so more, I say, this concerto is almost more of a reflection of Clement, the guy for whom it was written, than a big, strong, I mean, of course it's a big, strong statement. And because Beethoven was in this incredibly fruitful middle period where, again, he was making these statements. I mean, what's interesting, he wrote the Fifth and Sixth Symphony right next to each other. And those are like diametrically opposed pieces aesthetically. You know, one's the Pastoral Symphony, which describes nature and gentle and blah, blah, and rustic life. And then there's the Beethoven, the Fifth, where, you know, he's shaking your fist at the heavens, and then, you know, major triumphs over minor, and, you know, all that. And so these are the same Beethoven, but like totally different aesthetics. And so I think the same is true with this concerto. I mean, it's reflective of his, you know, of the fruitfulness of that time, of his creative time, but also very much for whom it was written. So we get that, like if Clement were a different violinist, we'd have a different concerto, I think. Yeah. And it'd be like Naha said, you can hide behind kind of technical stuff in a way, like in a way, but there's nowhere to hide with this piece anywhere, you know, in the first and second movements, because of the quote unquote simplicity and because of the role that the violin plays.
Naha, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, actually there's a little fun fact about the cadenza I'll be playing. Here's a little trivia. So how many piano concertos did Beethoven write?
5.
Yeah, so there's the five main concertos, and then there's actually a bonus concerto because he transcribed the violin concerto for piano, and he called it Opus 61A. I think he did it partially because the violin concerto didn't do so well in its time. It kind of failed. And so for that transcription, he actually wrote out the concertos, the cadenzas. And so we have an original Beethoven cadenza for the movements, and for the first movement, I'll be doing a modified version. A few violinists now have kind of written it back for violin, so it's an adaptation of a transcription. And
timpani.
That's right.
Is it? Are you doing timpani, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, with timpani.
In the cadenza.
And then
right.
for the cadenza, and then the third movement, I'll be playing the standard Chrysler cadenza, which has been, loved for decades. So
That is so cool. I mean, I have to imagine that earlier cadenza may never have been heard here before, right? Or possibly?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Well, we won't get. But
here's another fun fact, actually.
There are a lot of fun facts about who's played this concerto in quad.
Yes. The premiere of this concerto in the Quad City Symphony was none other than Jascha Heifetz.
Wow.
Yes, Heifetz, and the last performance was none other than Midori.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, is that right?
Were you were here? You were here for that, Naha, right?
I don't think
Or was
so.
that before you?
Yeah, I think it was right before my time. Yeah.
Okay,
wow.
because Midori had her residency here, and
yeah.
she played. That was the concert. She played the Beethoven Concerto.
Wow.
So there's a lot of history in quad with this concerto. Heifetz and Midori, and like who knows?
And
who
now
else
Greenholtz. Now we get Greenholtz.
Now Greenholtz, exactly.
Yes,
So,
I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, and we are too. Before I let you go, though, I have to, and this is for both of you, but I'd like to start with you, Naha. The first concert was very, very emotional for many of us. To see you guys on stage, of course, I was watching from my computer screen as I watched you in your signature series, and will likely watch this one along with many others. I went back and I looked at the history of the symphony, and during the 1918 pandemic, they canceled all of the symphonic work and just did a series of trios and a couple of quintets, because the music director then, Ludwig Becker, was a violinist, and so he participated in all this. But here we were in the midst of this crisis, responsibly and I think very safely bringing the music together and presenting it live. And there was something that was just really overpowering for me, even watching on a little screen. And so I want to ask you, Naha, and then later, Mark, how was it for you to get back on that stage?
It was really something special. I have to say, in the first rehearsal, I was a little bit worried. The spaces on the stage, they kind of felt oppressive. Like you really felt that room between you and the next violinist behind you being 6 feet, and it felt like it took forever for information to get back and then to come back to the front of the section. But that very quickly turned around, and it was really a special program. The Montgomery was just really fun, and I think it a powerful program all in all. And so, looking forward on my calendar, I've kept my original calendar, but I've marked things canceled, and I have many more canceled things than things going on. So I'm so grateful that we have these concerts in Quad Cities to look forward to and to reconnect and make music for ourselves and everyone in the audience.
And we're very grateful for that. Mark, did you want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, the ovation that we got at the beginning, I mean, I honestly got choked up. It was like Naha and I looked at each other. It's like, wow. I mean, we all just looked at each other like, wow, this is a very cool thing. And like how, to be embraced by the audience like that, and to, it was very special. And I mean, that just kind of set the tone for the kind of specialness of the evening, I think. And I think musicians were very gratified by of course, being able to be together and make music, but equally gratified by the audience and their embrace of us. I think, it was, yeah. I mean, that's, to know that you're an integral part of the community, and that the community thinks so too, and they're responding that way. I mean, that's what musicians want to be. They want our music and what we do to be, part and parcel to the identity of the Quad Cities, and clearly that's the case. So that's very, very gratifying.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was great to be a witness to. So thank you for that. We're now going to shift to our friend Bela Bartok. And so Concertmaster, Naha Greenholtz, I want to thank you for your time, for being with us, and can't wait to see you in performance again. Thank you for joining us. But you are free to step
up. Send me the cadenza. Send me the cadenza.
I will. I'll email it.
I mean, I have the piano one in my score, but I want to see what you're doing exactly.
Of course, yeah. Okay.
But wouldn't it be more
Mike
fun to
also? Mike needs to know. Michael
Also
Geary.
attended, yeah.
Right, yeah.
He already chatted about it. So okay, see you at the concert. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Well, Maestro, so we know we're going to have some amazing music, but the Beethoven isn't all that we're going to be hearing. We also get to hear an extraordinary work by Bela Bartok. And this was the work that we're going to be hearing is part of a collaboration that he had with I think he was an Austrian fellow named Zacher, who
Swiss. I think.
Was he Swiss?
Maybe the orchestra's from Swiss.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Well,
Awesome.
when I hear Zacher, I think Zacher Torte. I think
Well,
Vienna.
exactly. He probably is Austrian. I don't know.
I don't know. Anyway, tell us a little bit about the selection of the Bartok that we're going to be hearing.
Well, so when the programs had to be altered to become smaller orchestra programs, I really was committed to keeping, as much as I could, keeping the same composers, keeping the same kind of aesthetic, the same ideas as the original programs had. The original Masterworks 2 was the Miraculous Mandarin by Bartok, which is a huge ballet, actually kind of a dark story. But Bartok, like using the full orchestra and colors and like really super edgy and anyway, so a different Bartok than the Divertimento, but nevertheless Bartok, who loved folk music, who loved color, who loved dance. I mean, it was a ballet, and so so I wanted to keep Bartok if I could, and the Divertimento just, I mean, became the perfect vehicle. It's written just for strings. Zacher, this conductor, had the Basel Chamber Orchestra and commissioned a couple things. He commissioned a bunch of works from mid 20th century composers, but commissioned the strings percussion, music for strings percussion and celesta, which is another classic, 20th century classic, and this Divertimento just for strings. And it's great because, I mean, it really is a divertimento. I mean, composers like Mozart, like Haydn wrote divertimenti, and it's, for diversion. It's lighthearted music, and it's meant to be. I mean, usually for those classical composers, it's like party music, background music. But so Bartok, who's a can be a very serious composer, also has a lighter side. And so this divertimento shows that. He's such a fascinating, unique voice because he was one of the first ethnomusicologists. I mean, he would go out in the fields, literally in the fields of Hungary and areas around there with Zoltán Kodály and make recordings of people, singing folk songs and playing their fiddles and sing. He would and try to transcribe that because he was looking for a way to express without being German. I mean, like so many composers who weren't German, he was trying to get outside of that influence. So he really looked at folk music a lot. He also looked backwards. I mean, he, wrote fugues. He wrote, there's lots of counterpoint. I mean, he's kind of while a very interesting, quote unquote, modern voice of the 20th century, he also is, very structurally classical in a way, or even Baroque, pre-classical. And so it's just a really incredible combination. He, like Beethoven, wrote string quartets, and his most kind of personal and most kind of adventurous music was in the string quartet medium, just exactly like Beethoven. And so if you know the Bartok quartets, they're just full of folk dances, but also full of like, you know, super expressive microtones and, you know, all sorts of like kind of pushing the envelope. Back then it was pushing the envelope. Now it sounds, you know, relatively tame, you know, because it's like almost a century ago, you know. But bottom line is this divertimento is what we call concerto grosso, which is a form where you have soloists and then orchestra answering them. So you have soloists who kind of, you know, maybe lay out the music, and then soloists are then the full body orchestra that kind of answers it, and it kind of goes back and forth. And so it features our quintet and of soloists, of principal players, and then the string orchestra answering that. But it is a divertimento, so it's very lighthearted, but it's like a Hungarian hoedown in a way. I mean, it's very lighthearted, very earthy. Anyway, it's just great music that people love.
Well, and I appreciate that very much. You talked a little bit about this, but with a composer like Bartok, I think of the term that's often used with wine, terroir, the soil from which it comes, right? Because as you said, it was in about 1904, he was out walking. He loved to walk. He loved to be outdoors. And he heard a Hungarian peasant girl singing a simple tune. And he thought, wait, there's something there. And you're right, then with Kodai, all the great work in terms of capturing, even when he came to the States, he was given the job just to make a little bit of money to catalog a bunch of folk music from what was then called Yugoslavia, right? And I wish he had lived longer in the States, because it would have been interesting to see his take on, you know, that terroir. But how do we see some of that sensibility, that wonder in the divertimento? Because as you mentioned, there's a bit of a lighter quality, but how do we see the personality of Bartok in this work?
Well, throughout, I mean, so Bartok created incredible moods. And so the second movement is the only kind of not lighthearted thing. It's like definitely night music, Nachtmusik. And so there are eerie things happening, and you know, that's where things get a little serious. But you know, we played it at the Rust Belt. That's what wouldn't come to mind. We played this at the Rust Belt. We played the third movement, which is, I mean, it's just like it's Copland's hoedown, except in the Hungarian language, you know, and it's absolutely that aesthetic. And so that's how we see Bartok. We see like the folky, earthy, peasant-like Bartok, or you know, or influenced that way. And the opening is just kind of almost neoclassical, you know, very elegant kind of drawing room kind of feel. You know, certainly in Bartok's language, but very lighthearted in a way, and very elegant, and almost Viennese sometimes in a way, you know. So it's just a fantastic combination of like Central European stuff with that folk element and the kind of earthiness of Bartok. And so it can be gritty, it can be elegant, it can be spooky. I mean, it really covers the gamut, but it's eminently listenable, and really, I think, a wonderful, wonderful work.
Oh, and I know everyone's going to absolutely adore it. Just one little biographical thing about Bartok, and I'm sure you noticed, because you're so observant, this is the city crest of Budapest on my lapel today. So it was a city that he certainly loved very, very much, though he was not from there immediately. It's the way these lives of these composers just bounce into world history. He saw the writing on the wall, and he left, especially when he saw that Hungary was going to choose a path of totalitarianism. He came back very, very briefly, and in leaving rather rapidly, he left his son Peter behind. He gets out through Lisbon and gets to the States. And the story that I wanted to share with you is he lost track of his own son, only to literally bump into him in a Bronx subway station. So Peter made his own way out of the country, got to the United States. And in fact, Peter joined the United States Navy during World War II and served in the Navy, I think through the end of the war. At the end of his life, Bartok, well, first off is the love-hate with Hungary, and this is where I think we'll go with it, is he loved Hungary, he loved Budapest, but he was adamant he would never allow his name to be on any street so long as there was any public memorial to Hitler or Mussolini, because of course they were kind of allied during the war, and that wish was respected. He was treated during some of those years as a turncoat, and I guess my question for you in your study of history is how our appreciations of great musicians can ebb and flow over time with the broad sweep of history. Last month, you brought us two great composers who we need to hear more of in America. And maybe we hadn't thought to listen to them a couple of years ago, but now
Right.
it seems absolutely appropriate. Tell me a little bit about how history influences music programming and appreciation.
Oh, I mean, hugely. I mean, we are reflections of the era and the culture that we live in. I mean, the United States would not have the culture that it did without World War II, of course. I mean, with Stravinsky and with Schoenberg, and I mean, all these European composers, Jewish or not, coming over from Europe, and becoming part of the academic life, the musical academic life, being commissioned. I mean, and frankly, and musicians too. I mean, orchestral players. I mean, World War II and the refugees who came to the United States changed the music in the United States without doubt. And the Quad City Symphony. I mean, you name the orchestra, you name the musical institution, and Central Europeans who fled the Nazis, absolutely changed everything. And so, how we think about music, how the direction our composers went, with whom they studied, whom young American composers studied, who they embraced and then ultimately rejected. I mean, Copland, was like the most, outlandish, modern European composer until he turned about 25 and then decided, well, what does it mean to be an American composer? Well, here's what it means to me. And different composers have different reactions. And so anyway, it's you can't divorce the two, without question. And so look, Bartok came here and was a little bit, he was ill and like commissioned and wrote pieces that like aren't his best work, to be honest, because of where he was in his life and how complicated it was. And, I mean, it's his best works are like the Divertimento and strings percussion and celesta and Miraculous Mandarin, in my opinion, more so than the Concerto for Orchestra, which is kind of like pop Bartok,
Well, and at the end of his life, he was actually rapidly working on a piece that he hoped would provide. He knew he was dying, and he hoped it would provide a legacy for his to-be his wife. And he left, I think, just something like 12 bars unfinished, and a student of his finished it to accomplish his aim. Anyway, you're such a good sport about where these conversations roam, and I'm so grateful to have these journeys with you through the ideas and the music. But unfortunately, we're running out of time.
Wow.
So in addition to thanking you, I would like to thank Chris Connolly of Wells Fargo Advisors for so graciously supporting this series. But Maestro, thanks so much for all you do for our community, and especially the time you take for Concert Conversations.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I can't wait to do this program. I mean, it's a really fun program, and, two just great works of art. And I know it'll be a wonderful experience for the audience.
So friends, if you haven't done so already, go to QCSO.org and get those tickets. We'll see you soon.